Okay, with this little blurb, I'm going to kind of talk about whenever you go to your rendering or saving your images for your room, how you can just add an occlusion map on there just to do a little bit more than just a screenshot, really, um, or instead of just a Maya render, because I don't like the Maya software render for one, and in other words, that if you're able to get to your your room and get some nice um, stage shots, I mean, there's no sense in just instead of this view right here, may as well just render out some nice views right here to kind of give it a more display look. And usually what I do when I do that is just do an occlusion map render, which is usually just a matte white. But what an occlusion map is, and I'll put this in the description too, it's basically bringing out the the blocking of the indirect light or diffuse light. It's going to show up mainly what light won't reach in these things, basically. So in other words, if I were to render this out with my diffuse map, and we'll go over maps, diffuse map and specular maps and everything, I could screen over these shadows right here and just bring these darks out more. And you can go by doing that and adjusting the occlusion map, the intensity, basically, of the light that's surrounding it. But usually an occlusion map will generate without light in general, so it doesn't really matter. So, but yeah. So the best way to kind of get used to it is just to go ahead and apply one, and then you can kind of adjust the samples. And this is kind of noisy right here, but I don't even really like looking at this render view. I like looking at my Arnold render view, which is right here. Hit play and it just starts running. See it down there chugging along. The good thing about occlusion map is you don't really need a high intense computer to be doing it too. It's not reading a lot, so most of your computers can probably render them out really fast. But just let me back up, and I got this little theme here. I'll go ahead and delete anything I have to do with the occlusion map. And this will come in handy too whenever we're doing our heavy texturing and stuff like that. Just getting used to this method and procedures, basically. This is all your rendering stuff up here. Now we'll get into the hypershader later in the semester where we'll start adding stuff, materials and stuff like that, and you kind of keep track of everything in a grid view, but we don't really need to even get into that for this. But you will need to access your render setup, which is this box right here. Now what this does, you can add layers to your render engine, basically. So if I just wanted to render this, it's not like creating layers over here in your channel box, but it's creating the render layers that you can add certain materials to. So the good thing of this, you don't really need any light for an occlusion map. So say like if I just selected everything, I have everything selected over here. So if you have your room, you just select everything in your room with no lights. You go here to create a new layer, and we'll just name this one occlusion. Now with everything still selected, you right click, you create a collection. Now we want to add all these items right here. And we did it. So everything on this layer will be rendered whenever we go to render it. Now we need to add a shader or a material to this, which is an occlusion map. So you just right click on the collection, create material override. Then you go up to this little clacker box up here, and another box will come up, and go into your Arnold tab and go to your shader. There it is, ambient occlusion. So now whenever I key in this dot, you'll notice everything kind of changed. That's because whenever I render this out, this override is going to take place and override all these materials right here. So this is the way I like to view my Arnold stuff. If I go to my Arnold, and if you don't have your Arnold tab up there, you need to go into your plugins and load it, and I can go over how to do that in class, but for the most part I believe most of you have it. Sometimes on the default it doesn't come up, so actually let me pause this and I'll make sure we got the right plugin manager. pause this real quick. Okay, it's the MTO. So if you don't see your Arnold tab up here, just go to your plugin manager and scroll down to your MTO. Right here, just make sure it's loaded. Then you go to your Arnold, open Arnold render view. This box will come up. Nothing going to probably come up black first because you need to run it. If you just run it, it'll constantly start running down here. You see it. Now this is a per screen render view, so that means if you mess with anything in your screen, it's going to start rendering it immediately. You can always stop that just by stopping it, because your computer will probably start running slow if you have this thing constantly on. Now you can kind of see, you know, this white. You get rid of these samples here, or these noises here. Going into your attribute. Kind of pulling these samples up just a tad, maybe. Don't want to do much, but like, say if you bring them to 4, it'll start chugging more down here, but it'll start looking a little bit smoother. This is the way I usually save these things. Type in my image how I want to, you know, my room.png. Save it to my desktop. I don't want to save it that. Let's call it the room. And it's going to save it out as background. That way you can kind of put in Photoshop whatever kind of background you want to. Now if you want a white background, you can add a Arnold skylight or just a sky dome. And if your sky dome light color wasn't black, which usually sometimes it is, or to gray, you can just change it to white in the attribute editor. But you don't really want to mess, since this actually drops a light in there, which will change the color a little bit. You don't want to mess with any of the exposure. You could actually turn the exposure down, or the intensity level down. Offset the color, change it a little bit. Yeah, this is a quick way to get like a nice little white matte of your rooms. It shows kind of the shadows and everything. Now if you decide to bring it up in the render view, your render clacker's right here. You need to make sure your and it will run through the thing. This gamma will be off. This is the same thing view, it's just not running the Arnold render view. To me it's just easy just to save an image out of the Arnold view. This is how it's going to save. Just make sure you turn your gamma off and you'll just save image that way. Which is how we'll save our high res renders. And for that you may need to go into render settings. Go down here and change your pixel ratio, 1920 1080. So if I wanted a big 1920, yeah, it's going to save me a big one. And it takes a minute. Usually with occlusion maps, they won't take that long though, or be that hard on your computer at all. But the higher the resolution, the longer it's going to take, and the nicer your picture will look. Then just save this image. And like we said on campus here, you will be able to render. You can use the computers. If you access the computers from your home, there is that instructional on how to access the computers from home and render them out that way. And then when we get into really high-res renders and stuff, we may be able to do it through the Ranch computing site. But for the most part, you can just get a pretty quick picture. Anything like your Maya software. Let me run it again. I'll turn to Maya software and I'll show you what it looks like. It probably won't because of the lights. Dum dum dum. It's going, it's going, it's going. I don't like that shape up there. Those triangles. Yeah. This is the reason why it's doing this is because I have a Arnold shader override on it of the occlusion map, which doesn't work for the Maya software. So this is why I use the Arnold render IPR view. And just to demonstrate how that render setup works, if I were to go back and click the bubble light off over here, or the eye viewer off, it would just take me back to my scene. That's the kind of the beauty of this layer system over here. Is that you can create overrides. So if you want to see what it looks like with a different color or different textures, you can just create different layers for that. And this is the default. In other words, you just don't really show a lot of the shadows and stuff like that. Plus, I just like it that matte white that's come up. So, okay, yeah. So this is just kind of a quick little what the occlusion map is, and like I said, I will post the definition basically of what the occlusion map is, because a lot of people are just confused with what does occlusion mean. It's basically showing everything that the light's going to be affected, and then it darkens, it shows all your shadows. In other words, that's kind of like the simplistic version. Get back to it right here. Ambient occlusion refers to the blocking of indirect or diffuse light of an object. It refers to the darker areas of objects, typically creases, cracks, and crevices. Here it is. Ambient occlusion is caused by the indirect light's ability to bounce around and illuminate areas that are blocked by nearby objects by the light rays. So we get really detailed when we're talking about lighting in Maya, because you can basically you can control any form of lighting, which is actually to your benefit. It's like if you go outside and want to film something or take pictures, you're really up to the sun's how the sun's going to be that day and how much light reflection you have. But within Maya, you can control all that on any instance with values, basically. So, okay, well, that should be the procedure of how to do that. And yeah, like I said, enjoy, and we will discuss later. Okay, bye.